Hi, everyone. Welcome to the webinar today. It's called Having Quality Career Development Discussions. My name is Joan Peterson. I work for an organization called Bluepoint Leadership, and we focus on all things leadership, from coach training to leadership communication to emotional intelligence, resilience, leading innovation. And today really will focus on this idea of the kinds of conversations that we have inside organizations. And if we think about some of the recent data, post-pandemic, we hear a ton of this. 83% of workers feel emotionally drained from work, whether I'm working from home, whether I have a hybrid or I'm back into the office. People are saying, I feel drained, emotionally drained at the end of the day. 86% of high potential employees feel used up at the end of the day. I mean, those are some frightening statistics. To add on to that, this is some of the research that was done with 2021. 64% of US workers report being disengaged. I don't think that's new data. It's data that we keep hearing. Of course, Gallup tells us that 70% of that drivers, those of us who are people leaders. I think, again, a frightening statistic. And then if we think about all the things we hear, you know, whether it's on social media, whether it's in the news, we hear this word, you know, the great resignation. Of course, that's an old term now. It became the great reshuffle. More recently, we hear this idea of quiet quitting. And if you haven't heard that term, it's people are quitting on the job. So they're not leaving, but they're just not being as productive. Some of the even more newer terms than that, the bare minimum Mondays is a popular term that you hear nowadays. It's a bit frightening. Okay, I'm going to do the bare minimum on Monday so that I can make it through the week. Now that's scary. Quiet hiring. Again, a fairly new term. That is that organizations' times have changed, times of limited resources. They're not really hiring. So they're repositioning the current employees they have and giving them additional responsibilities, which I think then goes to the bare minimum Mondays because people are overwhelmed and overloaded. And another term that I heard recently is rage applying. I'm so angry with my current position that I rage apply to tons of different other jobs. So all that to say, again, some newer terms, some not so new terms, all that to say that the expectations of leaders are higher than ever before. The role that we play as leaders makes a difference. Tons of research supports that if I have a good relationship with my leader, my manager, my motivation, my engagement goes way up. My staying power goes way up. And some of the things we just talked about are minimized. And if we think about, okay, so the leader makes a difference, no more time than the present. It hasn't become important. Most leadership happens one conversation at a time. So really the challenge for us as leaders is what kinds of conversations am I having? And my guess is on the call today, there are some people leaders. My guess is there are some individuals responsible for organizational development, for the structure of learning and development inside organizations. And there likely are some individual learners on the call. My hope is that there's something for each of those roles on the call as we explore some of the content. Of course, we look at it from a leadership standpoint. I believe even if you're not a people leader, there's something you can get from this webinar for yourself and wherever you sit today inside the organization in which you're a part of. And if we look at this idea of making conversations matter, I think, yes, it's important for us as leaders to be really intentional about having conversations that matter. And I think it's important for us as individuals to ask for conversations that matter with our leaders and others inside the organization. And I just pose this question: what types of conversations are you currently having? Again, as leaders, what kinds of conversations are you having with your teams? As individuals, what kinds of conversations are you having up, down, and across the organization? Specifically today, we'll look at this idea of career development. I think it's a huge part of leadership is engaging in those conversations with our teams about what's next, about what are they looking to learn, what are they learning currently, as well as individuals. If this isn't something that is started by the leader, what are some things that I can do to make sure that there's time and space for me to engage in these kinds of conversations? One of the questions that I typically ask, and of course, most of the work that I do is with leaders, and I oftentimes will ask them this question: well, who owns career development? Is it the individual? Is it the leader? Is it the organization? Let's get to think about that for a moment. Who do you think owns career development? Like, as an individual, do you own it? As the leader, do you own it for your team? And what role does the organization play in those career development discussions? And most leaders, after they kind of think about it, I hear lots of different responses. Mostly I hear all three have a role. Really, the individual needs to own it. The leader needs to provide space and time for it, and the organization needs to provide structure for it. And if that's the case, I think it's also important to think about each of those three groups benefit from the discussions. You know, as an individual, think about how would it benefit you if you engaged in conversations, plural conversations, about your development? My guess is you would be engaged, more motivated. Maybe you'd stretch yourself. Maybe you'd think a little bit differently about the work you're doing and how you're learning. Well, how do those conversations benefit the leader? If my team is more engaged, more committed, productivity goes up. If I start to tap into the unique talents of the individuals on my team, I can get, again, more done. I can utilize the strengths of those around me. And of course, all that leads to better results for the organization. One of the questions that I typically ask leaders when we talk about career development and career development discussions is, well, what scares you the most about engaging in these kinds of conversations? And there's always a bit of a fear, I think, from a leader's perspective. And I'll encourage you, for those of you who are leaders on the call, like, what are some of the fears that you have going into some of these discussions? Probably the number one fear I hear from leaders is, well, you know, career discussion is about where they're going. And I know that there's not a lot of space going up. Like, I know that they want to get promoted, and I can't give them that. I just know that the organization won't allow it. So I don't want to engage in that discussion because I know what the answer is. I know what they're going to ask for, and I can't give them that. And that may be true. And my question to you is, if that's the fear for you, what if you don't ask? What if you don't engage in that conversation? Guess what? That's still where they're looking to go. Yet, if I engage in a conversation with them, it opens up the dialogue to talk about what else. It opens up the dialogue to talk about, okay, maybe it's not moving up. Maybe it's looking at what else is out there. How can you tap into your strengths? What gets you out of bed in the morning? So when we look at some of the content we'll look at today, it really looks at it from that perspective. This isn't a career discussion, is not about how can I get promoted? It is about what's next for me. How can I develop? How can I know that the leader in the organization cares about me? 6 principles that I think are important for us to consider, especially from a leader's perspective. The first is, when you are in a talent or a career development discussion, be really intentional about suspending your natural judgment. Like, choose to see the person at their very best. Sometimes we go in and we're like, all right, I know what their strengths are and I know what they're not. And all right, what does that mean? So can you go into the conversation with fresh eyes? You know, we're all judgment making machines. Can you really think about, okay, I'm going to suspend my judgment and choose to go into this conversation engaged with this person and seeing them at their best? What are their strengths? What do they bring to the table? And how can we talk about that? It's easier said than done. So it's really being intentional going in, saying, all right, I'm going to suspend that judgment of you can never do that, and choose to see this person. This isn't a Pollyanna approach, but it is choosing to see the other person's talents. And the second one is at every opportunity, challenge the other person to stretch their goals and ambitions. This is not about, oh, you want to be CEO, maybe you should shoot for being on the board. This is, oh, you want to be CEO. How can you stretch them to think larger than that? So this is more stretching broadly and less stretching up. And it's helping them think about different options for themselves. So how can you challenge them to stretch what it is that they're looking to do and accomplish and learn? The third is, I think this is a key role for us as leaders, is our role is to search for hidden, unused, and untapped talent. So when I look at each person on my team, my guess is everyone has talents that they use outside of work that they're not using inside work. They have talents that are undeveloped that we can help them to develop. And they have unused talents, again, that they're talents that we know they have, but they're not using on the job. Is there a way for you to uncover those in this kind of a conversation? The fourth, and I think we as leaders, we recognize this is our role, is to help identify stretch assignments, demanding roles, high payoff projects. But I think sometimes we just look up. Is there an opportunity for us to develop breadth and depth? And sometimes it's just on one project. Sometimes it's just asking them to join a team for a shortened time. Sometimes it is switching their roles, but it doesn't have to be. So thinking differently about how I can provide experiences for those people around me. The fifth is assuming that most limitations are self-imposed. This is when you're engaged in a conversation and you hear the person say, oh, I can't do that, or I'm no good at that, or yeah, I don't want to even think about that. So it's challenging that. It's recognizing that we limit ourselves in many ways around what our talents are, around what our gifts are, around how we can use them. And the sixth is this, and I think this is really important, especially now, especially with all the data that I shared at the beginning, is help the person, help the individual, help the talent to integrate their values. That is what's most important to them, their passions, what do they love doing, and their personal qualities, their strengths into their aspirations. I think sometimes we kind of just started, okay, let's talk about what you want to do, instead of, well, here's what you're saying. But the words and the music don't go together. Like, these are your values. Like, this is what's most important to you. How does this aspiration connect with that? Or these are your passions. This is where you find joy. How will you get to do more of that moving forward? And these are your strengths. I mean, there's this opportunity to have a conversation around the person's strengths and how will they use them in this particular aspiration about which they're speaking. So I'll ask you just to take a look at those six. Are there any that when you think about the conversations you have with your teams, are there any that you want to be more intentional about tapping into? And for those of you, maybe there are some folks again who aren't people leaders. Are there any of these that you want to bring to the conversation or that you want to challenge yourself? You know what? I want to challenge myself about the limitations that I've imposed. Or I want to challenge myself to think about a stretch assignment to bring forward that might be helpful. Or I want to challenge myself to think about what are my values? What are my passions? What are my strengths? And how do they connect to my aspirations? I'd like to share some components of a career discussion that I hope you'll find helpful. And again, I'll invite you to look at it through the lens of you as an individual. What might this mean for you if you take yourself through these components? And as a leader, what can you take from this to bring into some of those career discussions that you're currently having? The components are a bit of a funnel. It starts kind of at the top, and it starts with a big funnel, and it looks at this idea of core ideals, and that is what matters most to you. This is around your values. And then it goes to, okay, if those are your values, that's what matters most to you. What are your strengths? What's special about you? What's individualistic about you? What's different about you? What do you bring to the organization that maybe not a lot of other people do? The third is, okay, based on that, what is your best future? What are those aspirations? How do they connect to your core ideals and personal qualities? And from there, it's, let's be realistic, like what's possible. And then lastly, after I've thought about some options, it's what are some of the actions I'll take? What are some of the things that I'm going to do as an individual? And I think that it's really important for us as leaders to recognize that, yes, we own a part in a career discussion, and the individual really owns the actions that they'll take. Our responsibility, as we said before, is to help them connect them with others, to help them connect with assignments or projects or roles. But really the action comes down to what's the individual going to do. So let's look at each of these pieces in a bit more detail. If we start first at the top with core ideals, again, this is what matters most to you. And a couple of questions that you might ask. You might ask yourself if you're doing this for yourself, or you might ask the individuals as part of a career discussion. You know, this question for what do you want to be known? And if somebody asked you that for what do you want to be known? What do you want people to say about you? What are the kinds of things that you'd want to be known for? This is a legacy question. What legacy do you want to leave? That helps to get at this idea of what's important to you. Another, I think, that gets at this is, well, what'll make you happy? What gets you out of bed in the morning? What are some of the things that bring you joy inside work? What are some of the things that bring you joy outside work? Some of the work that we do with our clients is around values, and we do in lots of different ways. This is kind of a quick way for you to take a look at the screen, and I'll invite you to take a look at it. I know there's lots of words on the screen. I'll invite you to take a look at those 57 words on the screen. All different kinds of values. It's probably not an exhaustive list, but if I were to ask you to choose your top 6, so out of these 57, you only get 6. Which would you choose? You know, which are the things that are at the core of who you are? What's most important to you inside and outside work? And can you choose 6? And I think it's such a valuable conversation for us to have with our teams and in one-to-one basis. Do you know what they value? Once I know what they value, what's most important to them, really helps me to be able to develop and coach them, because I can connect, or I can help them connect their aspirations to their values. And what are some of the pathways? What are some of the things that connect? And if it doesn't connect, I can bring that up. Sometimes, oh, I want to do this. And then you look at what their values are, and it's not a match. I also think it helps us lead better when I know what your values are. I think one of the things that we fall into as leaders when we don't know what people value is we assume that their top 6 are my top 6. And I engage in conversations with them. I talk to them through the lens of my values instead of through the lens of theirs. So again, an exercise for you to do for yourself, potentially a conversation starter in a career development conversation with others. So if we start with core ideals, what's most important to you? For what do you want to be known? What makes you happy? And then talk about, okay, what's special about you? What are your strengths? What are some of the things that you uniquely can do better than others? Starting with this, and I'll ask all of you to think about this for yourself. When you're at your very best, what are you doing? And I would say inside work, when you're at your best, what are you doing? Outside work, when you're at your best, what are you doing? It starts to get at who are you as an individual? What is it that makes you you? And what are the strengths that you bring inside and outside the organization? And I challenge you to ask yourself and others this question as well. What can you do better than almost anyone else? And I'd ask you, again, I'd invite you to ask your teams this question. My guess is you'll be surprised by what they tell you. If you were to answer it for yourself, what would you say? What can you do better than almost anyone else? And those are your personal qualities. That conversation is extremely important in a career development discussion. Some things to think about, lots of different tools out there for you to look at strengths and qualities. This one is kind of 20 qualities. If you had to pick 3, which would you pick? Which of these would you say are your top talents or top strengths? Would you say you're intuitive or analytical or curious? Are you good at execution? Are you a good communicator? So again, it's looking at what are the strengths that I bring that maybe are uniquely me. This one is a bit different. The next slide is a bit different. It says, okay, if you had to pick 3 roles, which roles would you pick? Would you say that I'm a juggler, or I'm a coach, or I'm a designer, or maybe I'm a musician? Like, in your strength, when you're operating from a place of strength, which roles do you play inside the organization? This starts an interesting conversation because it helps get people out of, well, my strengths are I'm in HR, I have people skills, or I'm in IT, I have system skills. Gets us out of that. And it helps thinking about, you know what, I'm a juggler. Like, I need to juggle multiple things every day, every hour. Or I'm an engineer, like as an instructional designer, I need to make sure everything fits together. Or I'm really good at risk taking. I'm a bit of a gambler. So when we get people talking about what they believe their roles are and their strengths are, this just gives them a different way of looking at that particular, kind of looks at it from a different lens. The third part of the model, instead of starting with key aspirations, we start with core ideals, kind of at the heart of the matter. Who are you? And then we go to strengths. And then we go to, okay, based on that, what's your best future? And what's the most exciting future you can imagine for yourself? Or how can you do more of the work you love? Like, what does that look like? So this is around helping that the individual connect core ideals and personal qualities to key aspirations instead of just saying, I want to be promoted. In what ways might you be selling yourself short? You know, maybe you're working with someone who is more on the self-limiting side. Potentially you would ask that question. This is around really digging into what excites you most about your future here. What have you never done before but would like to do in your next chapter? What skill or competency would you most like to develop? These are all questions you might ask to help people really think through what are their key aspirations. Notice there's an S at the end. This isn't I want a promotion. What are your key aspirations? What do they look like? Maybe it's a few short term, maybe it's a few long term. And then what do we do in order to get there, which is what's possible. So, okay, here are my key aspirations, again, plural. So what's possible? There are some things that will not be possible inside the organization. It's important to talk about those. You know, what are the biggest barriers facing you in terms of that as aspiration? It's engaging in that kind of a conversation. Or what are some entirely new career paths that might be possible? So it's helping broaden options and perspectives. It's thinking about what are some development opportunities inside and outside work. And I think that the leader has a role here in helping the individual think through what might be a stretch assignment. Or if there's no development opportunities inside the organization, is there a way for them to get involved in their community in some way, take a leadership role outside work, or start something inside the organization? The last piece is my favorite piece as a leader, because it's okay. So we've talked all about this. What are you going to do? And this is, and I love this question. What are you prepared to learn, invest, risk, and sacrifice in order to achieve whatever that aspiration is? So this isn't, okay, you want that, I'll help you get it. This is, okay, what are you prepared to do? You likely will need to learn something. It likely will require an investment of some sort, or a risk of some sort, or a sacrifice of some sort. What are you willing to do in order to march toward whatever that aspiration is? From whom do you need support or resources? There's certainly likely a role for you as the leader to help them in that action planning. And then what's the most potent next step you're going to take? What's the step you're going to take when we leave this conversation, so that it's not just a piece of paper, so that there's an opportunity for you to do something leaving the conversation? You can have any kind of action plan. We put one together here that looks at, okay, if I'm a leader and I'm holding a talent or career development conversation, I'd want to really focus on, okay, what area are they looking to develop? Are they going to look to excel in their current role? Like, is there still development in their current role? Expand their current role, prepare for a future role, or is there something else? As well, you know, what are some of the actions they might take? Is there an experience that they'll need? Is there a project or an assignment? Is there formal education or training? Any on-the-job activities or opportunities? Maybe there's coaching or mentoring that might be a possibility, or skills and competencies that they need to acquire. So this is looking at action through lots of different lenses, and it's engaging. This isn't the leader putting it together by themselves. It's not the individual putting it together by themselves. It's looking at each of these as a pair and engaging in a conversation around what are the opportunities. You notice that I had questions throughout the components of the talent development conversation. Here are all the 12 questions. I encourage you to take a look at this list. And again, you've seen all of them. Which are the questions that you'll ask your talent, your team? Which are the questions that you'll ask yourself? Like, what are you walking away with? What are some of the things that you can do differently as a leader to engage in more powerful career development conversations? And what are some of the things that you can do as an individual to engage in these conversations with your leaders? So again, this is the career discussion components all on one slide. And I'll just share a brief story with you. When I was younger, my aspiration was I wanted to run a bed and breakfast. I thought after I kind of did the corporate thing, I would own a bed and breakfast. And I love to entertain. It's one of my passions. Community, I love to build community. I'm a facilitator, I'm a coach. And when I really looked at this, and it took somebody else to point it out to me, and they challenged me. They're like, Joan, like, yes, your values is supported by your values. But when you really look at your gifts and your strengths, my gifts and my strengths are more individualized. I'm an introvert. And they're like, I know you love to entertain. But then they started asking questions around, well, when you have people at your home, like, what is it like when they leave? I'm like, oh, I crash. And it's like, well, guess what? When you own a bed and breakfast, the people don't leave. So to me, this was really helpful in thinking that, man, my aspiration for a very long time was this is what I want to do. When I really looked at what matters most to me, what's special about me, and what brings me energy, that was not a good fit. So I think sometimes when you engage in this kind of conversation, you start to unearth things that people thought they were sold on. Like, this is what I want to do this. And when you start to dig in, they'll find that maybe there are different avenues, there are different pathways for them to explore. My invitation to you is to really think about, based on this very short webinar around career development discussions, what commitments are you prepared to make? Not just to become a more coach-like leader and try and change some of those statistics that we talked about at the beginning, but what are some of the things that you'll commit to doing for yourself around your own development, around engaging in these kinds of conversations with others? If there's anything we can do at Bluepoint, please reach out. Thanks so much for tuning in. Hope you have a great day. Bye, everyone.